Welcome to Port Isaac, and welcome to the Gap Year as well. So this week on the Gap Year, I don't really have as much time to do my usual kind of video because I've just arrived in this village, which feels very much like home. So this is the fishing village that my grandfather has lived in for a very long time. It's sort of a hub almost for my family in England. The big thing that brought me to England, and also the reason largely I started doing this video project, the Gap Year, is so that I can take my grandfather's oral history about the family and its members and all sorts of stuff, as well as his own personal life stories, and turn it into some sort of video project. So because I didn't have the skills necessary to create such a project, that's why I'm standing here talking into the camera on the back terrace of my grandfather's house, which is named Tremaine. This week I want to talk about a specific subject. If you know me, which I'm sure all of you do, you know I'm quite a political person. So with that, you know, I want to attempt to put my political voice a little bit into the Gap Year. And this week's subject is climate change, really, is the pollution crisis that we're facing and experiencing and living through as we speak. So, I mean, everybody knows about climate change. I don't have to tell you, it doesn't matter what part of the world you're living in. This summer has been warmer than previous summers. It's been drier, grass has been going brown. People have been dying of heat exhaustion. And that's, you know, largely my audience is between Canada and the United Kingdom. But, I mean, other parts of the world are suffering more dangerous extremes than either of these places. But in Japan, it's been much worse. They've recorded the highest extreme temperatures they've ever seen. The heat waves have been sustained. The weather patterns, they're not moving in the same way that they used to. And it's a really big problem, and things like this, not just temperature increases, but changes to the usual weather, that's happening all over the world. And this is where you'll have to forgive me for being political, and if you can get past that, please also forgive me for the assumptions that I'm going to make for the purposes of having a conversation. But really I want to focus on the divisions between people, and this is where I start making some assumptions. And largely the subject I want to follow is the divisions between younger generations and their attitude towards climate change, and older generations and their attitude towards climate change. And, you know, I could add a bunch of disclaimers, but mostly I'm speaking in broad terms based on my own experience. I think largely younger people, again, broadly speaking, are more apt to accept the notion that there's a problem, and maybe older generations are less likely to accept the problem, and more importantly, the scale of the problem with which we've put in front of us. And something that really doesn't get talked about, because maybe it's not a problem, maybe I'm entirely wrong, but from what I've learned with working with such a wide array of people, is that everybody has their own opinions. Of a group of 100 people, if you impose a decision on them, then even it could be the most sensible decision in the world. 5 people are going to love it, 5 people are going to hate it, and the 90 in the middle, they're going to be fine with it. What I mean to say is that no matter what, there's always going to be some people that fit a certain description. So the people I'd like to talk about today are the people who have some denial of this crisis which we're facing, and I kind of want to explore that denial. In thinking about it, basically what I've come up with is that I think that it's entirely possible that quite a few people who deny the crisis is happening could feel a great sense of guilt for the crisis. I mean, we always say, well, you know, it's the older generations who have given us this world, you know, they've handed off the world to us, and this is the state that it's in. But it's very easy to pass the blame, I think. As a young person, it's very easy to pass the blame to those who are here today and those who have come before for delivering us this crisis with which we are now faced. And I think that a lot of older people who feel that sentiment coming from younger people, and might also be denying the pollution crisis itself, would feel a sense of guilt about it, whether or not they communicate it or not. You know, I think there are certainly quite a number of people out there, again, predominantly of the older generations, but also younger generations as well, who have been equally poor caretakers of the environment, myself included. The point is that we are all guilty. I don't want to, you know, guilty is kind of a nasty word to use, but it's true. And for these people who may feel that sense of guilt, and particularly if you're of an older generation, I think an important conversation that we need to start having is that, you know, younger people must forgive that. They must forgive what has brought us to this crisis. You know, people always say, like, oh, in 500 years they're going to look back at us and think, oh, what idiots, they made such a mess of the place and we're still dealing with it. And while that might be true, I don't think that we can reasonably adopt that sentiment today. You know, let the people in 500 years decide what to think of us and the people that have come before us, you know, us being me and my generation. I think that a really good step to starting to accept this problem on a broader scale and subsequently solve the problem is to make sure that nobody should harbor any specific guilt for their role in where we are. You know, we're all shared in this. It is a global crisis. It is not a national issue. It is not a provincial or state issue. It is something which we are all suffering all around the world. I think it's particularly important as well because you know, if there are people who feel guilt out here, out in the world, I think that guilt is could be a culprit in this manifested denial. So if we make an effort to talk about that guilt and forgive what guilt might be there, then I think that could be a good step in helping to reduce the overall denial and begin to accept that this is happening and we need to be responsible for it, and we need to really start making changes on a policy level, but also more importantly on a personal level. And if you don't feel that you require forgiveness, if you don't think that there's anything to forgive, then please do accept my apology for insisting that there is something to forgive. We need to think about it on a global scale. I don't think we can point to other places and say, well, we're not as bad as them. We need to, or, you know, they need to do something and then we'll step up. I think you know, the burden is on all of us to step up, and I see Canada as a good place to start that. You know, even though as a Canadian, maybe per capita my carbon footprint is less than an American, that's not an excuse to not try and reduce my carbon footprint. We're all going to suffer the consequences of each other's mutual actions or each other's inaction. On a more personal note, you know, something I see in my future is, well, so basically, you know, for years now, I've said to people privately, you know, my family and friends and things like that, is I really don't feel like I'll be able to comfortably have children when it comes that time, because I have no confidence in what the world will be like by the time that they're my age, even today. You know, by the time that my eventual potential children would be 20 or 21, who knows what the world is going to be like. It really feels like that on the current trajectory, it's going to be a very unstable and largely unsafe place. You know, as countries and towns and all of that all over the world become less and less habitable as a result of the pollution crisis and the change to the climate and the shorter term weather patterns, there's going to be a mass influx of climate refugees, and we need to start preparing for that problem, especially as Canadians, where we have a famous amount of free space in our country, free land that could potentially be developed in a sustainable way and used to house some or a great deal of the climate refugees that will one day have to flee their country. And it's a real shame because a lot of countries are already seeing that. Where I come from on PEI, we're already seeing tougher erosion. Where I used to live in Nova Scotia, the power of the Fundy tides have had a real impact on the area that I used to live in, and now they're losing farmland, their infrastructure is at threat. I think it's going to become very important to, again, as a Canadian, maintain our openness and maintain our hospitable sense, because if we aren't willing to welcome people in and give them, well, not give them, don't worry, but, help to provide them with a new life in Canada, then eventually our hands will be forced, either by our own government or by the government of another country or the body of countries in the United Nations. So I think it's very important to be aware that one day soon Canada is going to be the place for climate refugees to come. And if you are the kind of person, for better or worse, who wants to keep the balance of historical culture in Canada while still allowing refugees in, then it's in your interest to start working to solve this crisis, because the longer it goes on, the worse it gets, the more people that will be displaced, and the more people will have their lives ruined and their history and their homes destroyed by this crisis. And they'll come to Canada, which I tend to think is a good thing. In 50 years, when the climate has really taken its toll on us and all kinds of people have moved into Canada, then it's going to be a really broad and interesting culture, and that's going to be great. It'll be great for the economy. I think Canada will be the envy of the world in that regard one day. So that's all I wanted to talk about. This is a conversation we need to have. And if you're somebody who is, and I can understand, I can respect it, but if you're somebody who looks south of the border, or who looks to another part of the world and maybe points a finger a little bit at, try to forgive the people that you're pointing a finger at, because it'll go a long way to being able to solve the crisis. And, for my sake, for everyone's sake, all around the world, that is really something we need to get on as soon as possible. More aggressively than we are right now. We're not doing enough. And at this point, I'm still thinking I might be the last generation of my family, at least. It's a difficult thing. Thank you for watching The Gap Year. Sorry, it's a bit of a downer this week. I really did want to talk about something important to me, and there isn't anything more important to me than the pollution crisis. Every issue is attached at the hip to the pollution crisis. So we really need to get better at talking about it and talking to the people who came before and the people who are growing up now with this crisis. We need to all get better as generations talking about this and finding solutions. So that's it for this week on The Gap Year. I know it was a bit of a different one, certainly, but as you can see behind me, I've got a lovely view. I'm going to be giving you again the tour of Port Isaac. You'll learn all about this really wonderful little village in the next couple of weeks, and then from there you'll learn more about my family as well in the next couple of months. So thank you very much for watching. I hope I didn't upset anyone's sensibilities too much, and I look forward to sharing the next couple episodes of The Gap Year with you. Cheers.